Welcome to Surface Knowledge, the only podcast that provides you with useless information for a useful reason. Never again be stuck without an interesting tidbit or fun fact in any social situation. Here's your host, Max Curtin.
Welcome back, Surface Dwellers. You know, I haven't actually checked if anyone likes that name, but I'm just kind of rolling with it week by week anyway. Welcome everyone to episode 8. Last week we explored the mysteries of the sea with ghost ships, and this week we're going in the opposite direction. We're heading up north and we're going to look at a perplexing mystery in space. But before we get to that, thank you very much for tuning in. Nice to have you here. I hope your noggins are filled with surface knowledge at this point, and I have to do the usually podcasty promo stuff out the way at the beginning. If you could please like, share, tell a stranger, write a letter to a strange aunt telling them about this cool new podcast you found. That would be great and really appreciated. You can also follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok under Surface Knowledge Pod for additional fun facts and clips. Yeah, I wasn't so painful. That was easy. So for those who don't know, which is, I presume, why you listen to this podcast in the first place, you're seeing the episode titled there, and it's saying a surface knowledge of Oumuamua, and you're curious enough that you've clicked play on this episode, and I thank you very much for that. But what is Oumuamua? Well, Oumuamua is the first confirmed object from another star system to visit our little solar system back in 2017. And I think it's personally pretty cool because I love a little bit of space. Now, I read the book Extraterrestrial, The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth by Avi Loeb, who's an Israeli-American theoretical physicist and Harvard University astronomer during lockdown. And it was a fascinating read that painted a great picture of the possibilities of this strange object. Now, obviously, we're going to discuss Avi and his theory a little bit later, but we're going to also be looking at the origin, why this was so unique, and the various other theories that support what this object was. So without further ado, welcome to a surface knowledge of Oumuamua. So let's paint a picture to begin with. On October 19th, 2017, a telescope perched on a Hawaiian mountainside spotted something odd, a tiny speck moving fast across the sky. At first, astronomers thought it was just another near-Earth asteroid. These things get flagged all the time, no big deal. But then they looked closer. This object wasn't just zipping past the Earth, it was flying on a hyperbolic trajectory, meaning that it wasn't looping around the sun like a comet or an asteroid. This was on a one-way trip, not from the Kuiper Belt, not from the Oort cloud, but from outside our solar system. It had never been here before, and it wasn't planning to stick around. This was the first time in human history that scientists had confirmed an interstellar object visiting our solar system. Not a satellite, not a probe, not something that we launched into space. This was something alien in the truest sense of the word, simply meaning from somewhere else. It was later named Oumuamua, which is a Hawaiian word that means scout or messenger sent from the distant past. A very poetic name considering we basically caught it mid-flyby. Now, a quick note on naming, because the Pan-STARRS telescope that spotted it is based in Hawaii. Hawaiian language names are often used for major discoveries. In this case, it was entirely fitting. Oumuamua was scouting our solar system for the first and likely only time. But what made it even more incredible is that we almost missed it. It had already passed its closest point to the sun before anyone even realized that it existed. By the time the scientists knew what they were looking at, Oumuamua was on its way out. It was rocketing away at about 87,000 miles per hour. So naturally, scientists were scrambling to observe it before it vanished forever. And then, some things got a little bit more weird. We've got this visitor from beyond our solar system. That alone by itself is absolutely huge, but it wasn't just where Oumuamua came from that raised eyebrows. It was kind of everything else about it. From the second that astronomers started analyzing the data, they realized that this object was not behaving like anything we'd ever seen before. If we start with the shape, based on how its brightness changed as it rotated, Oumuamua appeared to be extremely elongated, up to 10 times longer than it was wide. And that's pretty extreme by asteroid standards, because most space rocks are potato-shaped. They're maybe a little bit lumpy, but this thing, it was often described as cigar-shaped, needle-like, or, my personal favorite, a space pancake. But based on later models that suggested it might actually be flat and disc-like. Some scientists even joked it looked more like a splinter than a space rock. Now, no telescope ever directly imaged Oumuamua in detail. It was too small and too fast. Everything we know comes from how the light reflected off of it as it tumbled through space. But the light curve, the way its brightness fluctuated, showed dramatic variation, which could only be explained if it was shaped very strangely. The next interesting issue was the spin. Oumuamua wasn't spinning smoothly like a baton, it was tumbling chaotically. It was flipping over itself as it traveled, and that's rare. Most asteroids and comets have relatively stable rotation. This object seemed to be doing almost cartwheels, and then, as if all of this wasn't weird enough, it sped up. So as it moved away from the sun, Oumuamua started accelerating ever so slightly. But it was enough to measure, and it didn't make sense. Normally, this kind of acceleration happens with comets. As the sun heats up their icy surfaces, they cause jets of gas to push them along. But the thing with Oumuamua is it didn't have a tail, no gas jets, no dust trail, nothing visible at all. It behaved like a comet, but it didn't look like a comet. It didn't behave like an asteroid either, and this left scientists kind of scratching their heads. Even the way that it reflected sunlight was weird. Its surface was highly reflective, more so than typical space rocks. Some thought this might be due to a metallic or icy composition, but without being able to sample it, all we could do was guess. So here's a summary of what we kind of know so far. It came from another solar system. It looked like no asteroid or comet that we'd ever seen before. It tumbled unpredictably, it accelerated without a visible cause, and it was gone before we could get a good look. And that, my friends, is how you get a front row seat to the scientific version of collective existential panic. Naturally, theories started flying, some reasonable, some a little bit more out there, and some that got one Harvard astrophysicist laughed out of half the room and onto every late-night talk show. But we'll get to that. We've got an object that doesn't quite behave like a comet, it doesn't quite look like an asteroid, and somehow it speeds up without any visible propulsion. Naturally, the scientific community said, okay, maybe it's something we've never seen before. So let's just break down here the leading theories, it's weird but it's still natural explanations. The first one that kind of came up was the weird rock theory, aka it's just a super odd asteroid. Some astronomers argue that Oumuamua is at its core just a rock. It's a really old, really beat up piece of planetary debris from another star system. Maybe it was knocked loose from its home during a collision or ejected during planetary formation. It's basically a cosmic tumbleweed. The elongated shape, maybe that's the result of billions of years tumbling through interstellar space, eroding and reshaping over time. The acceleration, maybe it's outgassing like a comet, but it's just too faint to see. The issue with this theory, though, is that the models don't quite fit. We've never seen an object this elongated or this smooth or this active without visible emission. So yes, it could be just a rock, but not a rock like we've seen before. The second theory was the hidden comet theory, and this early theory suggested that Oumuamua was a comet, but just a very unusual and weird one. Maybe the materials on its surface, like a thick crust, prevented visible gas or dust from escaping. Or maybe the gases it emitted were invisible to our instruments. After all, space is weird. Maybe this was a comet from a system with a completely different chemical makeup. Still, most comets show some signs of activity. Oumuamua didn't even have a fuzzy halo or coma, which is pretty standard for an active comet. So again, the theory was possible, but just awkward. The third theory was the hydrogen iceberg theory. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more creative. There was a 2020 paper that proposed that Oumuamua might have been made of solid hydrogen. That's right, it would just be basically a frozen iceberg composed of molecular hydrogen. Now, hydrogen is incredibly light and it sublimates, it turns from solid to gas very easily when heated, and it would do so invisibly in most telescopes. So when the sun warmed Oumuamua, it would have released hydrogen gas jets, providing just enough push to explain the acceleration without a visible trail. Sounds pretty elegant, right? But here's the catch. Hydrogen ice is extremely fragile and unlikely to survive the journey across interstellar space. Cosmic radiation, starlight, and time would have likely eroded it long before it got to us. So while this theory does answer some questions, I think it opens up a bunch of new ones. And then finally, we have the nitrogen shard theory. And this is another cool contender. Oumuamua might have been a fragment of nitrogen ice that was chipped off from the surface of a Pluto-like planet in another star system. Nitrogen ice can also sublimate invisibly, providing that slight acceleration. Plus, it would explain the relative surface and odd shape, as planetary crust can break off in sheets or splinters. This one has fans, obviously it's natural, it's testable, and doesn't require alien technology, but again, there are no other nitrogen ice fragments drifting around to compare it to. It'd still be one of a kind. Many astronomers now think that Oumuamua might just represent something entirely new, a class of interstellar objects that we've just never seen before. After all, this was the very first interstellar visitor that we caught. There could be millions of others out there, and we've just been missing them. Maybe these weird, tumbling, non-comety comets are common and our solar system's just finally on their travel itinerary. But even among natural explanations, one thing is clear. Oumuamua is unlike anything we've ever observed. And for some scientists, that opened the door to just one more possibility. As I mentioned in the intro, let's talk about Avi Loeb. He's not a crackpot. He's not a UFO chaser. This is a tenured professor at Harvard University focusing on theoretical physics and working on astrophysics and cosmology, who chaired the astronomy department for nearly a decade. Loeb is a respected astrophysicist with hundreds of published papers, a track record of high-level collaborations, and one of the most mainstream resumes in all of science. Which is what makes it so shocking when in late 2018, Loeb published a paper with postdoc Shmuel Bailey suggesting that Oumuamua might not be natural at all. Their theory that this odd, fast-moving object could be a piece of alien technology, possibly a light sail. Now, a light sail or solar sail is a theoretical method of space travel that uses radiation pressure from stars to push a spacecraft. If you imagine an ultra-thin, highly reflective sheet like tinfoil on a cosmic scale, photons from the sun push against the surface, gradually accelerating the object without the need for fuel. Now, this isn't just a science fiction crackpot idea, this is an idea that exists in our very own plans. NASA, the Planetary Society, and other space agencies have already launched test sails like Icarus and Light Sail 2. Loeb's point was, if we're thinking about building these, why don't we just assume that someone else already has? And what made this theory plausible in his view was the object's non-gravitational acceleration. It was speeding up, but with no visible exhaust or comet-like tail to explain why. According to Loeb, the acceleration was consistent with how a light sail would behave, gradually picking up speed as sunlight pushes against it, especially if the object were paper thin, just millimeters thick. This could also explain why it was so reflective and how it managed to stay intact after traveling possibly millions or even billions of years through interstellar space. Now, Loeb didn't just stop with one paper. In 2021, as I mentioned, he published a best-selling book called Extraterrestrial: The First Sign of Intelligent Life Beyond Earth, which was definitely one of my favorite lockdown reads, and it laid out his theory in detail. Not just about Oumuamua, but about why the scientific establishment is afraid to entertain ideas that challenge convention. When it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and walks like a duck, he writes, why insist it must be something else entirely unless you're afraid of the answer? Loeb argued that Oumuamua was a wake-up call, not because it proved aliens exist, but because our response showed how closed off mainstream science can be to even the possibility of non-natural explanations. He criticized what he calls groupthink in academia, the tendency to discard fringe ideas without serious investigation. According to him, too many researchers are more worried about their reputations than about following the data wherever it leads. To put his theories into practice, Loeb launched the Galileo Project, a privately funded initiative aimed at searching for alien artifacts interstellar objects, and unexplained aerial phenomenon using high-resolution telescopes, AI analysis, and open scientific methods. In other words, he's not just speculating, he's building an entire research infrastructure to look for the next Oumuamua and be ready when it shows up. Now, of course, most of the astronomy community isn't convinced, as we mentioned in the alternative theories with the speculative models that offered an alternative explanation without invoking aliens. And Loeb's critics argued that his model depends on Oumuamua being thinner than any known natural object, yet somehow surviving deep space. And we didn't collect enough data to justify an alien hypothesis. And worst of all, invoking extraterrestrial intelligence without hard evidence risks undermining public trust in science. In short, scientists argue that Oumuamua was weird, but jumping to aliens is too big a leap unless every other possibility is exhausted, and they argue it just hasn't been. But it begs the question, doesn't it? What if? Loeb's point, however, isn't that aliens are the most likely answer, it's just that they shouldn't be the last resort. He argues that the reluctance to seriously consider these artificial origins, even as a possibility, says more about cultural hang-ups than the object itself. After all, when a visitor from another star system behaves in ways we can't explain, shouldn't we at least keep all possibilities on the table? And even if Loeb is wrong, he's helped kind of shift that conversation. He has made it okay for serious scientists to ask weird questions again, and maybe more importantly, he's brought public attention back to space science in a way that's curious, skeptical, and just a little bit hopeful. Because in the end, Oumuamua may just be a rock, or it may have been a message in a bottle from a civilization that we've never met. And I think he made a really interesting point once. He said, if a caveman saw a cell phone, he'd just think it was a shiny rock. Just because we don't understand something doesn't mean that it's not advanced. Now let's be super duper clear here. No one is saying that Oumuamua definitely 100% came from an alien civilization. There's no signal, no writing on the side, no tractor beams. It was probably natural. But I use the word probably very heavily there. But even skeptical scientists admit that Oumuamua was unusual. And the idea that it could be artificial, that it might be a fragment of something made, not born, is what makes this so compelling. Because for the first time in modern history, we had an object from outside our solar system that refused to be explained. And it got scientists, the media, and the public asking, what else is out there? In a weird way, the whole alien debate made Oumuamua matter more, not less. It kind of forced people to pay attention. It brought that mainstream attention to interstellar science. It cracked open a door that most scientists usually kept quite shut. The one marked, what if? In the end, Oumuamua didn't stick around. It slipped quietly out of our solar system, never to return, and we never got a close-up. No flyby, no interception, no answers. But that's what kind of made it unforgettable, and that's why I wanted to do an episode on it. Because for a few weeks in late 2017, this weird, tumbling interstellar object had everyone from astronomers to sci-fi nerds to your friend with a podcast mic and a tinfoil hat asking the exact same question. What if that wasn't just a rock? And that's pretty rare. Space stories don't usually break through like that unless there's a launch or a moon landing, but Oumuamua made headlines. It inspired memes, documentaries, conspiracy theories, and serious peer-reviewed papers. Not because we knew what it was, but because we didn't. Here's the thing, even if Oumuamua wasn't alien or exotic hydrogen snow, it was still a first. This was the first confirmed interstellar object to visit our solar system, a physical piece of somewhere else that just happened to pass by while we were looking up, and that alone makes it historic. And it's already changing the way that we approach space observation. Since 2017, we've had new telescopes developed like the Vera C. Rubin Observatory that are being designed to better detect fast-moving transient objects like Oumuamua. There's also projects like Project Lyra that are being proposed, and their goal is to develop missions that could intercept the next interstellar object before it flies away forever. And yes, Avi Loeb is launching his own research initiative, the Galileo Project, to actively look for signs of extraterrestrial technology using those high-end telescopes and open data. In short, Oumuamua lit a fire under the scientific community. We want to be ready next time. And part of why the story caught fire is that it hit a nerve. It landed right in that sweet spot between science and mystery, where that kind of data ends and imagination begins. And as I've mentioned before in previous episodes, people love an unsolved case, especially when it involves space, possible aliens, and a name that sounds like it belongs in this epic poem. It's not that everyone believes it was an alien spacecraft. It's that for once, the idea couldn't be completely laughed off. The mystery wasn't created by fiction. It was created by the limits of our instruments and the strangeness of the universe itself. In that way, Oumuamua became less about what it was and more about what it represents. The unknown, the unexpected, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, we're not alone. So Oumuamua was here and gone in a cosmic blink. We didn't get to catch it, touch it, or follow it, but it did leave a mark. Not on our planet, but on our perspective. And it reminded us that the universe is alive with motion. It's full of stories and travelers that we haven't met yet. And every so often, one of those travelers passes through our patch of space without explanation. Thank you so much for joining me on this interstellar episode of Surface Knowledge. If you like the show, give it a 5-star rating. Follow Surface Knowledge Pod on TikTok, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube. Please send any glowing space rocks or theories to gottill5@gmail.com. And always remember, the truth might be out there, but sometimes it just keeps tumbling out of reach. Join me next week, friends, to gain a surface knowledge of American folklore.
You've been listening to the Surface Knowledge Podcast, part of the GT5 network. Be sure to subscribe and rate on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. We'll see you back here soon for another episode. Until next time, stay curious.